Russell Westbrook has declined his player option. So what does it mean for the Denver Nuggets and their offseason plans ahead of the 2025 season? And could the Colorado Avalanche be on the verge of making some pretty significant moves or see some significant departures as they get set to begin their offseason this summer? All things to come on today's rundown, and we will begin in the NBA, where it was announced by NBA reporter Mark Stein that Russell Westbrook will be declining his player option ahead of the 2025 season. He was due about $3.4 million as a part of that agreement, and will instead opt to test free agency to get more money from another NBA team, perhaps another overseas team, or at a minimum, squeeze a little bit more coin out of your Denver Nuggets. So I guess now with that fork in the road, the Denver Nuggets are faced with asking the question, what is the best course of action for them as a team? And does Russell Westbrook still fit into that picture the way that they thought he would at the beginning of last offseason? And to answer that question, I think you have to look at the Russell Westbrook in the true dichotomy that he is. There are two sides to Russell Westbrook. There's the yin and there's the yang. The agent of chaos is a confusing and polarizing amalgamation that makes his overall evaluation a little bit difficult. On one hand, you have regular season Russell Westbrook, who we saw actually develop a decent amount of chemistry with Nikola Jokic and create a two-man game that helped keep them afloat as they dealt with injuries to Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon, where they were forced to shuffle the lineup around and use Russ off the bench a little bit more than they maybe thought he would when they signed him last offseason. And it looked pretty good. Russell Westbrook statistically over the course of the season averaged 13, 5, and 6, decently respectable numbers for a guy you were bringing in to essentially be your spark plug off the bench and be the potential leader of your bench unit. But there is the good side of Russ that maybe produces those kind of numbers and helps you kind of keep a two-man game afloat, as I mentioned, as you deal with injuries over the slog of an 82-game regular season. And then there's the bad side of Russ. And the bad side of Russ comes out for the same reasons in a lot of ways that the good side manifests itself. And that is that Russell Westbrook has one singular speed, and it is full gas pedal to the metal. Good or bad, Russ's game is entirely predicated on burst, athleticism, and speed. And given the fact that he's entering nearly 2 decades in the National Basketball Association, the physical aspect of Russell Westbrook's game is going to steadily decline on a year-to-year basis. This is a guy who was the 2016-2017 NBA MVP, and deservedly so, a guy who at one point in his career was averaging triple doubles over the course of multiple seasons, but we are too far removed from that style of play and that level of player to count on it on a night-in, night-out basis. And instead, you get flashes and bursts of it that make him a tantalizing prospect in an offseason. One of the reasons why several NBA teams over the last 6 or 7 seasons have vied for the veteran guard services. But then the other side of Russell Westbrook comes out, and the coin turns over in the way of erratic and inefficient decisions with the ball, poor shooting and inefficient shooting from inside and outside the arc, and some boneheaded, head-scratching decisions like Russell Westbrook attempting and missing a layup against the Minnesota Timberwolves that he didn't have to take instead of opting to try to run more clock out, and then fouling Nickeil Alexander-Walker from beyond the arc, allowing the Timberwolves to steal a game at the charity stripe and spoiling a historic 60-point triple-double for Nikola Jokic. And then you get to the postseason where teams are allowed to hone in and focus on one specific team and one specific set of rotational lineups rather than the regular season lily pad team to team that we see during the regular season. And that is where the inefficiencies in Russell Westbrook's game are more pinpointed and highlighted and exploited by opposing offenses and defenses. And we saw that manifest itself in the regular season. So with the Nuggets specifically, given the fact that 82% of their payroll is locked up into their core four of Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., and Aaron Gordon, and the limited flexibility that they have, you could make a genuine argument that the Denver Nuggets are better off with Russell Westbrook, accepting the demons and the negative side of that coin, than they necessarily would be without him. There is always other tempting options in the free agent market in any given offseason, but you don't know if you're going to have the best offer for those players or what course of action they may choose to take or how they view you from the outside. So my thinking is, I think that Russell Westbrook is a decent enough fit with the Denver Nuggets and showed enough flashes in terms of positivity throughout the course of the regular season and some moments during the postseason that if you can just find a way to rely on him less, especially in the postseason, I think you can mitigate and navigate some of those other erratic nature and moments that we saw much better than they did this past offseason. But to do that, you need another step from players like Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson and Jalen Pickett. You may need, especially in the regular season, an emergence or a breakout from a second-year player like Deron Holmes, who missed the entirety of his rookie campaign due to injury. And so if they can find ways, if David Adelman can find ways to maximize some of the youth that Calvin Booth emphasized so significantly, that Michael Malone tried so hard to avoid, if David Adelman, in the beginning of his tenure as head coach of the Denver Nuggets, can find a way to maximize the youth on this roster and maybe rely on Russell Westbrook a little bit less, I do think that his veteran presence and the energy that he brings can be a net positive for the Denver Nuggets in ways that it wasn't because of overexposure in last regular season and postseason. Shifting gears to the NHL, a Colorado Avalanche may be in store for some moving and shaking this offseason in ways that maybe we wouldn't have expected a handful of months ago. Frank Saravalli, a veteran and respected NHL reporter, put together a list of trade targets ahead of the 2025 NHL offseason and have about 30 names that he has compiled thus far. 3 Colorado Avalanche made the list, some of which may be a little bit more familiar and some of which maybe not so much. On the more familiar side of things, one of the names that popped up in Frank Saravalli's list was defenseman Samuel Girard. Sammy G last season put together numbers that looked somewhat like what you would expect from a defenseman of his caliber. He had about 24 points, the vast majority of which coming in the assist category and notching 3 goals during the season last year. Sammy G's been linked to trade talks for a number of years now. He's got 2 years remaining on his current contract at about $5 million average annual value per year. The problem with trading Sammy G, despite the fact that he might propose as someone in his late 20s, as somebody that a team can build around and maybe bet on some upside there and lock down for a cheaper AAV for a number of years, the way that the Avalanche have done with Logan O'Connor and others, is that the Avalanche need help on the blue line, and they are particularly thin when it comes to that third-line defensive pairing. So that trade may be more difficult for the Avs to try to replace, given the fact that they're thin enough already than other areas along the roster. Sammy G is also, by league standards, a little bit of an undersized defenseman, and I think teams don't want to have too many undersized defensemen on their roster because of the limitations that it could provide. So if a team is already a little lean or light size-wise in that area, Sammy G maybe isn't as attractive, thus hurting his overall value across the market. Another name on this list is a newer face in town, and that would be third-line center Charlie Coyle. Charlie Coyle's last season for the Colorado Avalanche looked about like this: 35 points, pretty dead evenly split between goals and assists at 17 and 18 respectively, but somebody that actually, in my opinion, fit the bill and helped the narrative that Chris McFarland and Jared Bednar and company were looking for when they sliced off a major member of the Avalanche core in Mikko Rantanen in the name of spreading out quality depth from their top 6 to their bottom 6 and improving the depth scoring, which was the hallmark and the secret sauce that allowed them to steamroll their way to a 3rd Stanley Cup back in the 2022 season. Charlie Coyle, though, as a third-line center, is making $5.25 million a year, and therein lies the reasoning why he lands himself on this list, in my estimation. Because if you're the Avalanche and you've got $12.6 million tied up into Nathan MacKinnon to be your top-line center, and he's worth every penny of that and more, and you just re-signed Brock Nelson, who was another incoming acquisition and the latest iteration of the turnstile at the 2C spot for the Colorado Avalanche since Nazem Kadri's departure. You lock him down for $7.5 million average annual value. You're looking at about $20 million tied up between your first and second line centers. Can you afford, if you're Colorado, to pay $5.25 and potentially and likely more after next season for a third line center? Or is that just simply too much juice tied up into the middle of your lines there? So we will see what the Avalanche will do with Charlie Coyle, a guy in his early 30s, who was maybe considered more along the lines just like a Brock Nelson, as somebody who was more of a 1 to 2 year rental than the figurehead core piece to anchor your third line. And the final name on this list, and arguably the most painful if we were to see a departure, would be that of Marty Necas, the crown jewel centerpiece of the original trade to Carolina that involved Mikko Rantanen. This was the player, the winger who you were hoping, if you're Chris McFarland, that you would be able to get 70 to 80% of the production of Mikko Rantanen for significantly less of the price than you would have to pay Mikko Rantanen, and they chose ultimately not to. Marty Necas's box score looked a little bit more chunky than the two previous names on this list. 83 points with 56 assists and 27 goals netted on the season. The regular season of Marty Necas looked a lot different than the postseason of Marty Necas, as Dallas's physical style of play and the size that they have from top to bottom, particularly with their forward grouping, was simply a little bit overwhelming and overpowering for a smaller-bodied player like Marty Necas, whose game is predicated on speed, elusiveness, and the like. So while Marty Necas initially was the figurehead with which the Avalanche could attempt to build around and the replacement of Mikko Rantanen in this Avalanche top six, if he leaves in the offseason, and there were rumors and unconfirmed reports that maybe Necas wasn't as happy with his time in Colorado as many thought he might be. If he were to leave in the offseason, or better yet, just want to bet on himself for one more year, because from the Avalanche's perspective, locking up Marty Necas right now would make a lot of sense. If you can get him at currently sitting at 1 year left on his deal at $6.5 million, if you could re-sign him in the $8 to $9 million range for a 26, 27-year-old forward on a multi-year deal, that would be the most beneficial and cost-conservative move for the Colorado Avalanche. But Marty Necas, who feels like he's probably an ascending player and kind of came over herky-jerky in nature in January of last year to join a new team and develop chemistry with a new top line, if he can bet on himself for another year and then maybe test the waters for $10 to $12 million in free agency, that's a situation where the Avs could find themselves in a deja vu with the Mikko Rantanen situation, where they have a young ascending player, Necas, the most recent iteration of that, who is outpriced for the market that they want to pay. And then, if that doomsday scenario happens where you trade away Mikko Rantanen, who ends up leaving Carolina, going to Dallas, helping knock you out of the postseason in the very same season, and then the player that you decided to build around in Mikko's departure does the same thing just a year or two later, you would be looking at this situation very, very differently. And even I, who was in the camp of Chris McFarland and kind of a staunch defender of the philosophy behind the Mikko Rantanen trade, even if the results in that first season didn't manifest itself the way that anyone wanted them to, even I would have to raise my hand and say, you know what? Everything that could have gone wrong for Chris McFarland over the course of these moves and the dominoes that fell afterwards did go wrong. And man, it would look a lot different in hindsight. So let's hope, if any of these three names have to come to pass as departures for the Colorado Avalanche, that Marty Necas is probably not that one, because that would leave the Avs in a significant hole and make the departure of one of the better players in franchise history and a perennial 100-point scorer like Mikko Rantanen sting a whole lot worse. Happy Friday to you all. We have a busy weekend ahead of us. The Broncos begin their summer break. The Avalanche have a lot of names in question that we've gone over today that could get busy in this offseason. The Nuggets bought up quite a bit of property over the weekend or over this past week or so, but still haven't named a general manager search, which we will be on the lookout for that. And the Rockies, they walked off the San Francisco Giants, who are red hot, but Dinger struck out with Mrs. Met. And so that is apparently what we're looking at when it comes to the baseball team in Colorado. We will see what else the weekend brings to us, and we will catch you at noon on Monday.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.